Welcome to Imagine Otherwise, the podcast about the people and projects bridging art, activism, and academia to build better worlds. Episodes offer in-depth interviews with creators who use culture for social justice and explore the nitty-gritty work of imagining otherwise. I'm your host, Kathy Hanneback. This is a special episode of the Imagine Otherwise podcast and is the first in a three-part mini-series exploring the APAC Culture Lab coming up July 7th through 9th in Honolulu, Hawaii. APAC is organized by the Smithsonian Asian American Pacific Center, otherwise known as APAC. Following 2016's transformational culture labs, CrossLines in Washington DC and CTRL+ALT in New York City, APAC will continue APAC's practice of community building through curated art making. The biggest culture lab to date, most of APAC's participants are based in or rooted in Hawaii, with the majority of artists identifying as Pacific Islanders. Across the 3 episodes of this mini-series, I talk with curators, artists, and scholars involved with APAC about the themes that this culture lab brings together, ranging from climate change and environmental activism in Hawaii, solidarities and activism across the Pacific archipelago, queer and trans indigenous art, Hawaiian sovereignty and the ongoing fight against U.S. colonialism in the region, and the way that the racial, gender, national, decolonial, and environmental convergences of Hawaii help us imagine and produce different worlds. In this episode, I talk with the 3 curators of Waikai, Kālewa Correa, Lawrence-Minh Bùi Davis, and Adriel Luis, who share their experience curating this innovative exhibit. Thank you so much, the 3 of you, for being here to talk about the Culture Lab.
Yeah, aloha.
So I would love to hear a little bit about how the theme and the location for this particular Culture Lab came about.
The theme for APAC came about with this idea of convergence, and it's because I believe here in Hawaii we kind of naturally have intersectionality already occurring among people just because we're a small group of islands in our archipelago, and because people live so closely together, not only do we have that intersectionality that naturally occurs, but we also have people marrying each other. We have this idea of local culture and mixing and blending here, and so the idea behind APAC and convergence was this concept of looking at the converging of these different identities as far as creating new ideas. And so APAC literally in Hawaiian language, Olelo Hawaii, means the shoreline. And so the shoreline itself is a place where you have freshwater and saltwater meeting. In traditional Hawaiian society, you would have the farmer and fisherman meet there. It's a place that you can go into the ocean, whether you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter. There's no real boundaries there. I mean, there's geographical convergence there with saltwater, freshwater, ocean meeting land. You also have this idea of bearing waves coming in and hitting the shore. And so when we think of that and put it into the context of artists and a convening and this idea of the culture lab, the idea was to have a convergence of people coming from different disciplines, artistries, cultural practitioners, and it was for those people to actually converge and hopefully create something new out of that convergence and also working together.
So this is the 3rd Culture Lab that you all have done. How have you found those different experiences? Or maybe do you want to talk a little bit about those past 2 ones and how they added up to or ended up in this 3rd one?
Kālewa was talking about Hawaii as a place where intersectionality organically occurs in ways that it doesn't in, somewhere like Washington DC. So really quickly, intersectionality is about the collisions of the different ways that we identify, and it's not limited to multiculturalism. And in fact, it's a huge leap from just thinking about how different cultures collide. It's really thinking about the ways that race and gender and sexuality and class and those kinds of identifiers, create really complex ways that we interact with each other and the ways that we perceive ourselves. And so with CrossLines, our first culture lab, our goal was really to amplify conversations of intersectionality in conversations with museums and with cultural heritage and contemporary art and things like that. And so the move into APAC is still bringing those concepts of intersectionality, but recognizing that in a place like Hawaii, where, for example, you have mahu as a third third gender, you have a history of matriarchy, you have these kinds of intersectional concepts that I think are relatively new to a place like Washington, DC or New York, where we had our second lab, but where we're really able to kind of see how we can evolve concepts even further in this kind of a playing ground.
I mean, I think I would add on to that, thinking to the control alt and then to Aikai in a different way, thinking about how we're intervening in space. So CrossLines took place Memorial Day of 2016, and we popped up for 2 days in the Arts and Industries building, which is the original Smithsonian museum. And we are thinking about it as kind of refiguring this museum space, which has been closed to the public for quite a while for historical preservation, and rethinking what a museum now would be, especially one that was created not by collecting and gathering materials from all over the world, sometimes in kind of illicit ways, but in this case by working with local community, working with artists of color, and kind of creating a pop-up, not so much a collection, but an experience in a museum. And then moving forward to Control Alt, we popped up in New York City, in Soho, right on the border of Chinatown, and wanting very much to kind of appear in Soho as a way to think about gentrification and changing cities and changing urban space. And so the theme of that cultural lab was Imagine Futures. And so I think that's a kind of natural transition for us to now pop up in Honolulu, in the Ala Moana Center, in a foodland there, just a kind of really short distance from the beach, and move into this away from the urban or just the urban, and be thinking about ecological futures and thinking about our responsibilities to land and water. As Kālewa mentioned earlier, this convergence and shoreline, we're right next to the shoreline, and this is a chance for us to think about this kind of converging space of local and tourist, among other things, but I think also our relationship to the earth. And that feels like a progression from us going from museum to urban space and now to a different kind of intervention.
One of the things that struck me quite intensely in the artist convening that we all met up in Honolulu in April for was, number one, how many artists are involved in this massive project, but also how many of them are thinking really critically and creatively about that environmental question and kind of how issues of land and of space and of cities and of rural areas and shorelines, how these all kind of intersect. And, you know, everyone is working in different media, has different artistic histories, but it seems to be a common thread across all of their work. Was that planned? Did you pick these particular artists because they were already interested in these questions, or were you hoping to provide a space for artists to explore a new question in their work?
That idea of malama aina or malama honua, which is care for the land, care for the earth, is persistent in a lot of practitioners and artists' work here. So I think it just organically is in the work that you'll see from people from Hawaii generally. I do think that in the case of what's going on right now with global warming, you know, the idea of people looking at the environment, the health of our world, I don't think we actually sought people out. It was in the actual theme itself, in Aikai itself, it was mentioned, but it really seemed to be something that artists coming to convening, not only from Hawaii across the islands, but across the U.S. and across the world, have been thinking about, and it's been on people's minds. So I think that, you know, there's this global consciousness that's happening right now that people are really starting to look at themselves and look at their sense of place and sense of being and really exploring that. And I think we're seeing some of that coming out in the artists that are a part of Aikai.
I also say for the convening, we gathered folks, right, for a day to talk about the theme, to introduce themselves to one another, to create community, to think aloud together about convergence. But then on the next day, we took everybody out to Ho'olu Aina and did a day of service work and kind of community building there. And as a way of asking all of our artists to think about where we're going to be creating work and the context of place and our responsibilities to place and to the natural world around us. And I think, you know, asking them to do that work all afternoon is a kind of naturally going to seep into the projects that they want to create, and I think kind of incline them, if they weren't already, to be thinking about climate change, thinking about changing environment, thinking about invasive species, and our responsibilities to the land.
One of the conversations that I thought was most fascinating at that convening was thinking critically about what it means to do artistic work or an exhibit in a particular community and leave something there after everybody disperses. And so, people were trying to figure out ways that they could incorporate that into their individual art. So how can I make something that would be useful to communities after I leave? Or can I leave a piece of the work here or the work in its entirety? And that's a very different way of thinking about art and of exhibit making. Has that been a key goal of yours with the Culture Labs, or did that kind of organically emerge out of the AICAI one in particular?
The concept of a culture lab, the third of which is AICAI, is all about thinking about how we can put together something that is reminiscent of a museum experience, but using community organizing practices all the way through. And so things like leaving a footprint in a community, leaving a space better off than you left than it was when you first came, things like that might not necessarily be inherent when it comes to a traditional curatorial practice, but it's definitely something that is very much embedded when it comes to community organizing. And so in curating the artists and also in the background of the curators, I think along with talent, for example, when we're selecting artists, part of it is also openness and empathy and a sense of responsibility, which we feel manifests in the quality of a culture lab just as much as how good someone is with a paintbrush, for example. And so I think with that, it definitely has been inherent with all of the labs. But I think that said, given the very unique history and circumstance of Hawaii as a contested space and a history of people from the U.S., from major institutions dropping into Hawaii and kind of just taking stories or narratives or experiences or information and not necessarily reflecting the community or leaving the community better off is something that we were made very well aware of as soon as we began doing our research, entertaining the idea of doing something in Hawaii.
How did that come about? How did you decide on Honolulu as a location?
For the APA Center and the Asian Pacific American community in general, one of the big issues that has been around for as long as I've been in the field is the fact that we call it Asian Pacific American or Asian American and Pacific Islander, but generally Pacific Islander experience has been marginalized within the field. And so when we were thinking about places where we would actually want to introduce the Culture Lab, it just really seemed very appropriate and organic for us to see Hawaii as a site where we could address that issue head on. And so with AICAI, it's not only our first major project as the center in Hawaii and in Honolulu, it's also the first project that we've done where the Pacific Islander perspective actually outnumbers the Asian American experience. I think that there's also a lot in thinking about how we can expand. If we were thinking about CrossLines as a place where people are reinvestigating their own personal identities and Control-Alt as a place where they are reimagining their relationship with their neighborhoods and their surrounding environment from a distance proximity, then we're looking at AICAI as a place where you can really, everywhere you look, you're kind of seeing a mixture of urban development and nature.
So I know the artists are, as we're recording this, in the process of putting together their works, and we'll be doing some interviews with some of them about their particular projects. But I'm curious if you can maybe give us a taste of what attendees are going to be able to see when they come into the AICAI space.
We take this idea of what artistry is, I think, within the context of AICAI, and we just blew it up and let people run with it. So I have people on that are doing things like Uncle Calvin Ho will be creating traditional Hawaiian musical instruments that are pre-Western contact that most people don't know about. There's about 17 different instruments. And so he'll be creating them with participants at the Culture Lab. We have the idea of even traditional surfboard shaping happening. We have contemporary Native Hawaiian artists doing work on environmental themes, but also personal themes and looking inside themselves, whether it's, as Adriel said earlier, looking at, the idea of mahu or transgender or ethnicity, or even contemplating the idea of their role within society here in Hawaii. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Adriel now to talk some more about some of this exciting stuff too.
Ones that I am very excited about are the collaborations that have formed, especially because with Convergence, one of the ways that we're thinking about Convergence is how do we actually make this Culture Lab less of a group show where each artist is doing their own thing and only cares about their own project, and how do we really create a collective out of it. And so, for example, there's Jocelyn Ng and Jara Rager Wasasala and Teresa Siagatonu and Kathy Jetnell Kijiner, who are all collaborating as individual artists together for one project. And so Jocelyn's from Hawaii, she's Hawaiian. Teresa is from California, and she's Samoan American. Jara is from New Zealand, and she's Fijian. And Kathy is Marshallese from the Marshall Islands. And so you have people from different spaces, from different ancestral backgrounds, all collaborating together, and they're creating an installation that's part spoken word performance, part haunted house. They're each embodying demons from their places of origin, and putting together this immersive installation of poetry and media and costuming and special effects. And so I'm really excited about that one. I think not just because it sounds super duper cool, but also because it's these are four artists that know each other but have never really had a chance to collaborate on this kind of a level. And I think that this kind of collaboration is exactly what we're trying to encourage with the Culture Labs.
The collaborations are really impressive. And again, it's a very different way of putting together a show. And I know that's something that you've been working with at APAC for quite some time, is thinking about what a different model of art exhibition might be, what a different model of curating might be, what a different model of creating and distributing art into different communities. And I know this has been a big goal of yours, is to create that model that other museums or other galleries or other activist organizations or social justice groups can adopt and make their own and transform in whatever way they want to. But it also seems like it's a big intervention into museum culture. And I'm curious how you found that experience. I mean, working under the umbrella of the Smithsonian and the incredible possibilities and resources that can provide, but also kind of, pushing that boundary a little bit and thinking more creatively about what a different model might be. What has that experience been like?
I think it's been really empowering for us in that we're kind of creating a blueprint as we go, and we have this freedom to really listen to artists and folks in our communities as we're rethinking things, and not just kind of default to existing models. And this kind of generative possibility and this freedom that we've created for ourselves is really creatively empowering and ethically empowering. And we, I think as a team, we're really energetic about what we're doing and believe wholeheartedly in it. And it's a kind of exciting time to be working together. That said, working within institutions, trying to, just on a logistical level, creating new kinds of projects that we've never created before. They're not easy bureaucratic pathways for how to get things done. And so that has been a new kind of challenge, is building not only a kind of theoretical or ethical framework for how we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing, but also building the kind of, on a simple level, how do we pay artists? We want to pay them fairly. How do we pay them in a timely fashion? How do we create contracts when there's only a model for, say, commissioned work that'll go in a gallery, as opposed to a collaborative work that we're commissioning for an installation that'll pop up in a museum for 2 days. Because we're thinking outside of our existing templates, we're having to create new templates, and that is stressful and time consuming, and is a difficult process of figuring out too.
It seems like it's a really great example of what you were talking about earlier about integrating community organizing principles that come out of social justice movements, using them to transform these long-standing kind of complex bureaucratic institutions, which is hard work.
I think we all would agree with that, with any new concept or new way of doing things in an organization that's generally done things the same way for a very long time, it's looked upon sometimes possibly as like you're going against the grain, but really I think what Lawrence, Adriel, and myself with APAC and what we're trying to do is we're really trying to show this idea of what the community is asking for and what we see the populace saying, this is what we'd like to see. And so, what we're doing is, unlike traditional museum experiences of collecting things and putting it on display, what we're doing is we're collecting people together, collecting these stories and basically presenting it in a way that it's for a very limited time, but it's hopefully something that the experience itself will stay with you. If you're able to attend, it'll stay with you for a long time and you'll really think back to it. And I think, when we present that in a bureaucratic institution, there's sometimes a value judgment to that. But I think that as we've doing more and more of these culture labs, where the institution itself is actually starting to see the value in the way that we're presenting things and presenting these stories differently.
The collaboration aspect of this too is also a different model of creating art. So you have individual artists collaborating with each other that might not have otherwise gotten such an opportunity, but you also encourage participants to collaborate, right? The attendees, the people who come to the culture labs and the people who will be coming to the Aikai one are no different in the sense that they become part of the artist. They become part of that collective that helps make the things that are on display, that are interactive, that you can engage with, that you can question, that you can tinker with and transform in some way. I'm curious how maybe in the past exhibits or how you're looking forward to the upcoming exhibit, how artists are going to engage with the participants in the exhibit itself.
One of the great opportunities with the Culture Lab is to really think about what it means to make something interactive. To be quite frank, I feel like museums are generally pretty lazy when it comes to what counts as interactive. You just kind of assume that as long as you let people touch it, then that counts as interactive. But the pedagogy remains the same when you go into museums. So maybe there will be a bunch of touch screens and people can push buttons and stuff like that, but it's still this framework where the curator has all the answers and is dumping the information onto the visitor. Or the artist is presenting a work and the visitor is left to just kind of guess what the artist meant. And so we're creating an environment where the curators and the artists are really presenting works that are kind of more like prompts. And so as a visitor, you can come in and definitely learn and make realizations and discover things and have aha moments and have all those amazing kinds of experiences that you typically would get from a museum. But the curators get to have those too. And the artists get to have those too. And while there is a lot to be said about what's great about exhibitions, and we try to make very clear that we're not trying to turn every exhibition into a culture lab or make exhibitions die off and be replaced by culture labs, there's also something to be said about community-based art or situations where an artist can be developing something in real time or have something hot off the press and then be there and be present while visitors interpret and experience and process the work in real time. And how an artist can actually learn more about their own work or about the subject matter that they're addressing via the visitors. And I think that that's really the heart of what makes Culture Labs as a public experience for that weekend really magical and different from typical museum experiences. Aikai is the third in a trilogy of our original Culture Lab series. And after this, we're working to put together all of our takeaways and the things that we've learned and methodologies that we've developed and publish it as an accessible guidebook. And the hope is that for museums and organizations, big and small, that they would actually feel empowered to also either think about putting together their own culture labs or see it as a framework to rethink some of the things that they have traditionally done, but maybe with a different foundation that's more rooted in community organizing. I think across fields, whether it's in education or if you're working at a company or a museum, we come into these organizations and institutions and companies sort of adopting protocol and doing things the way that they've always been done. And our hope is that if we can show that even the Smithsonian as this really old institution can be at the forefront of thinking about new ways, and ways that in some ways are the antithesis of what museums have traditionally done, then that will inspire people to think about, what are other things that we can reinvent when it comes to community organizing, or when it comes to, marketing or education and things like that.
Okay, great. Are there any parting words or tantalizing bits you would like to give potential viewers as the exhibit comes up?
Yeah, I would say definitely stay posted on our website and our social media, SmithsonianAPA.org, and Smithsonian APA as the username on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Well, thank you all so much for doing this, and we are looking forward to seeing everyone up at APAC.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, mahalo.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of the Imagine Otherwise podcast. Be sure to check out the upcoming APAC Culture Lab July 7th through 9th in Honolulu, Hawaii. APAC is organized by the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, a migratory museum that brings Asian Pacific American history, art, and culture to you through innovative museum experiences online and throughout the United States. To find out more about APAC and read about the amazing artists and scholars whose work APAC features, go to smithsonianapa.org/AEKAI. The Imagine Otherwise podcast is produced by Ideas on Fire, an academic editing and consulting agency that works with progressive interdisciplinary academics. You can view the show notes for this episode, created by Priyanka Kara, on the Ideas on Fire website at ideasonfire.net, as well as find links to the people, projects, and resources discussed.